Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, A Year in the Afterglow. When you joined, you were all placed on mute, so please use the chat function to ask any questions, and we'll be sure to leave time at the end to answer those. And yes, today's webinar will be recorded and available in the coming days on our website, as well as sent to all registrants. Introductions today. Our webinar will be led by Don McFarland, our Technical Manager for Aerospace, as well as joined by Mike McRandall and Marty Willem, our Aerospace and QMS experts. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Don.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Welcome, everybody, to the first installment of our 2019 webinar series. As you know, we've done a number of these for the past couple of years. We wanted to keep that moving forward. For those that don't know anything about NSF, we've got a brief slide here associated with who we are, what we do. The conference, the webinars that we're doing all come out of this ISR group of NSF, and you can see we have our hands in a number of different business groups. If you want more, we'll give you our email addresses and you can contact us, but we're happy to help, and we've got a full range of services that we can help in any facet. We're going to start with a poll. So the poll question here, does the current standard, we're talking about ISO 9001 2015 or any of the 2016 series AS91 9100, 9110, 9120 documents, do they require less or more documents or maintain documented information than the prior version? More or less documents. We'll give everybody just a couple of moments here to go through and finish the survey, finish a response. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. And you can see that the overwhelming majority said less, and that's absolutely correct. The number of citations for the term documented information is substantially less within the new documents. With that in mind, we're going to proceed to the next one here. When we did the upgrade audits, meaning we migrated from the 2008 series or the 2009 AS series to the 2015, 2016 series documents, did we add additional documented information for our own standards? Sorry, my phone's Siri actually activated here. We'll give everybody just a couple of moments here. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So we can see it was kind of a mixed bag. Some people added additional documents, some simplified their systems and went to less. A majority stayed about the same, which substantiates our topic here today quite well. One of the quotes that I wanted to highlight here is, planning without action is futile. Action without planning is fatal. And I'm going to circle back to that here in a little bit, but I wanted to just set that in your head for a moment, okay? Planning without action is futile. Action without planning is fatal. For our webinar today, we're going to focus on the top 5, meaning the top 5 nonconformities that exist, looking at some trend history. And that top 5 nonconformities are going to be based on the AS side of life, but they definitely translate to the ISO side as well. There's just not a great database for us to pull that from an industry perspective versus just an NSF perspective. But the NSF perspective, the data definitely jives with what I'm going to show you. And then we'll go through some commentary associated with the top 5 and the overall transition efforts and whatnot, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So this slide represents the top 5 nonconformities that were issued at audits, and I've broken it down by 3 different categories here. You could see the first column is the rank at post-transition, and this is the first column that I'm speaking about here with this green arrow next to it, rank at post-transition. So this is after transition, after upgrade audits, These are normal 2015 version ISO or 2016 version AS standard audits without upgrade. This is the order for the most nonconformities in terms of numbers, okay? The next column represents transition or upgrade audits, which sections of the standard receive the most nonconformities. And then for 2008 or 2009 version audit, so the Rev C AS or the ISO 9001 2008 version audits, here's where those same nonconformity categories ranked. You can see not a lot of change. We had this controlled nonconforming outputs kind of creep up, but other than that, really all of the nonconformities that are listed here, in fact, all 5 of these have been in the top 10 for years. And I'm talking data going back to 2012. That's when the system was introduced to allow me to track this. But going back to 2012, as an auditor, I can subjectively tell you that these are the nonconformity categories that were most commonly written, even way before that. The only one that's missing up from this list is probably document control, and that's because it'll be number 6 or 7. But now we'll go through each of those individual nonconformities, okay? Keep in mind the focus here is what's changed. What's changed in the standard? Why are we seeing these nonconformities creep up? And realistically, you're going to see a common theme here. All 5 of these nonconformities aren't for change clauses. In fact, what I've got broken down on the slides here, on the right half of the screen, this is the commentary that came from the IAQG gap assessment worksheet. And it says it's a new addition, not a new requirement, but new addition for increased segregation of counterfeit or suspect counterfeit parts, requirement for nonconformity control process to be maintained as documented information. So prior, the old standard said that we had to have a document associated with this, a documented procedure associated with that. So really nothing changed there, but we've added the counterfeit mitigation piece, and we have to have methodologies associated with the segregation of that counterfeit material. Okay, not a lot of technical change. No significant changes to the requirements of AS or ISO for 8.7.1, aside from the handling of counterfeit and addressing services. Because as a service provider, under the new standard, we have a widget that we handle or execute our service against. Now we have to address the service aspect, the non-conforming output of our service, as well as the non-conforming widget that we're handling through that service. So we've got two facets, right? For most companies, it's going to be a non-conforming widget, a non-conforming part that's the output of their process. And really nothing's changed there unless it's a counterfeit material. Documented information under 8.7.2 has modified slightly, but that's not tied to the 8.7.1 category that we're seeing the increased nonconformity rate on, or the nonconformities occur against. And what I mean by that is if we look at 8.7.2, these 4 components are now required to be associated or retained as documented information. The prior standard said nature of the nonconformity and subsequent action taken, and then we would have concessions captured as well as necessary, but it really didn't require us to identify the authority, specifically and explicitly require us to identify the authority under which that disposition was made. Now we have to have all 4 of those components captured within our retained documented information. So a slight modification. I see it more as a clarification than anything. But again, overall, there's not a ton of change here. The second one is under the area of control of production and service provision, or product and service provision, okay? So really what's changed with this, we added some focus on service companies because, as we know, the prior standard was really widget-centric. The new one is product and service. So there's some additional language associated with service-oriented companies, but the service organizations follow and adhere to the same requirements as a widget organization, just maybe a different set of planning documents or different conditions based on the type of their quote-unquote product. From the IAQG, it says the changes to this are results to be achieved, services to be provided, infrastructure, environment, periodic revalidation, actions to prevent human error. So again, not a ton of significant changes from a technical perspective, but they did add additional considerations for infrastructure, for environmental considerations like the human factors, right? So we've got to consider those. I can tell you I've looked through a number of the nonconformities that have been issued since, and there are a few that are human factors related, and for those that are just on the ISO side of the fence, and pardon the expression, but not involved in the AS side of life, that human factors program isn't a mandatory thing. Under the AS side of life, human factors is required now, and it's something we need to consider. As an editorial comment, I'll say having a thorough and robust human factors program is almost as important as a robust corrective action program, because people make mistakes, and that having this program in place allows you to understand how we need to adjust our planning, how we need to adjust our processes, what equipment, what infrastructure we need to make them more productive as they're executing their work. So if you haven't spent the time to dig in and create a robust human factors program, I'd certainly encourage that. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. One question that popped up here, what does counterfeit mean in this context? We'll talk more about the counterfeit here in a few minutes, but it's essentially parts that are not approved or misrepresented as being authentic or at a different tolerance or something like that. So I have counterfeit electronics, or maybe a steel that's graded incorrectly, an aluminum that's graded incorrectly, something like that. Again, we'll talk more about that. The third item is information for external providers. So as we all know, under the old standard, it said where applicable. The new standard takes away that where applicable, and it has a laundry list of things that need to be flowed down. But there's clarification that not all of them need to be flowed down. It's going to still depend upon the context of the organization, and I'll show you where that comes from here in a few minutes. But your customers are going to be the ones that determine what needs to be flowed down. They're going to create that base list for you. And then from there, it's up to the organization to determine what else we need to flow down to our sub-tiers, to our external providers, to make sure that they understand what we expect of them. What are our needs as a company from our external providers? Now, if I look at the change summary from IAQG, it says requirement for qualification of competence, supplier awareness of the contribution to product or service conformity, contribution to product safety, and the importance of ethical behavior. As we know, those are new AS requirements. So the expectation was that we add these to the list of things that might possibly be flowed down. Again, organizational context is going to be what drives the necessity of flowing those down. Now, that clarification comes from the IAQG clarification document that's available on their deployment support materials page, and I'll show you where that is towards the end of the presentation. But from that 9100 series clarifications document comes this right here. Do all companies have to flow down all requirements listed in section 8.3? And it says over here, ISO removed the words where appropriate, given that clause 4.3 allows the organization to apply the requirements when applicable. Organizations can determine certain portions of clause 8.4.3 listing are not applicable to their organization and have this justification as documented information. So if it's not applicable, not appropriate, we don't need to flow it down. If we go down here even further, it says, do we need to flow it down to all suppliers or sub-tier contractors? No. It's only a requirement to flow it down if there is a customer contractual or organizational QMS requirement. Regardless, the organization can also decide to flow down QMS requirements to its suppliers. So again, statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements supersede anything in the standard. From there, it's up to you as an organization to determine what do we need to slow down to ensure that we're complying with the needs and expectations of our interested parties. I'm going to circle back to that context thing on numerous occasions here because of the importance of it. Okay, number 4, nonconformity and corrective action. Nonconformity and corrective action change from the IAQG summary says combined nonconformity and corrective actions deal with consequences, analyzing the nonconformity, consideration of human factors during cause analysis, update risks and opportunities, changes to the QMS. So Don's version of that, from the ISO side, what's changed is everything except the human factors incorporation. From the AS side, human factors was introduced, and I've got that listed over here as well. Added consideration for root cause or causes related to human factors. So now we're allowed to acknowledge that people make mistakes and we need to build our processes such that we're taking that into account and or monitoring the people so that we're not putting them on critical tasks while they're, you know, not in the correct state of mind, or not doing those tasks when we're outside of our circadian cycle, things like that. We have a great webinar on human factors. If you want more information, I definitely recommend you go check that out. But we certainly want to account for those as we are determining the cause or causes of a corrective action. Beyond that, what's changed here, we combined the nonconformity and corrective action together. So we have these nonconforming outputs, but we also have nonconformity. So these are the complaints, if you will. Right? These are the one and done type fixes. Those may be escalated or elevated into a corrective action, but not everything requires corrective action. And corrective actions, as you know, are really expensive for us to do. We can bog our system down pretty easily by having too many corrective actions come through. So when we do that, we don't get to root cause. We don't have the time to implement. We create some perception or some reality that corrective actions don't have the importance that they desire or that they need. So now we have this escalation path where if it's a nonconformity, we find it, we fix it through correction, and then we can put it into the corrective action, so we take action to prevent the recurrence of the problem. Kind of a cool clarification. But again, no significant technical changes here, just clarifications on what was intended and how it should flow so that we're not bogging our systems down. The next one comes from measurement traceability, aka calibration. Really what's changed, traceability requires confidence in the validity of measurements according to the IAQG gap sheet. From my perspective, no real significant technical change. This is more of a clarification that we had to have confidence in the validity of measurement. And we do that through calibration, through gauge R&Rs, or whatever it might be. It's going to be risk dependent. Am I saying you have to do an analysis of variance associated with every measurement you take? Absolutely not. The cost doesn't make sense. But if we're doing critical dimensions, key characteristics, safety critical, fracture critical type inspections, maybe we want reliability. Maybe we want repeatability in our measurement methods, and that's where we'd introduce those types of studies. What has changed is there's actually a loophole associated with possibly not calibrating or verifying some instruments. Your customer contract may eliminate that loophole by saying thou shalt comply with 17025 or an ANSI spec or something to that end, but there is a possibility now for some of those measurement tools to not require calibration. Is that in your best interest as a company? It depends. You guys have to make the determination on the risk, the methods for managing and mitigating those risks, but again, we're going to take customer commentary or customer requirements into consideration as we do that. Next slide kind of summarizes what hasn't changed, and then I'll come back to what has changed here in a moment. What hasn't changed is the standards overall focused. As you can see, all of these nonconformities, all of these top 5 nonconformities post-transition were top 10 under the previous version. Really nothing significant changed associated with these requirements There were some minor clarifications, but really nothing changed from an overall new requirement coming into play. The industry has added clarification over time, and they have always done that. There's always a clarification sheet published by either the IAQG or the ISO working group that's going to say, this is what we intended, this is what we meant, right? Those comments then get rolled into the next versions as a part of the continual improvement processes for the standard. Expectations for effective corrective actions have always been the standard, the norm, right? That's been the expectation all along. We've got to take a corrective action associated with problems that come up, and we got to take that to make sure that it doesn't come back. We got to address the nature of it, we got to address the cause of it, and then we have to eliminate the possibility for recurrence. So none of this has really changed, but what has changed is the organizational focus on upgrades. I'm sure, and I can't speak for everybody on the call, but as you went through the upgrade to Rev D, we heard all the horror stories about getting there, about this risk-based thinking, and consultants were selling packages like crazy to help transition. So we put a lot of focus, a lot of energy into getting through the upgrade. And then we got there, and now we're in this period of afterglow where we're like, yes, we did it. But sustaining that system that we've built or that we've defined is now the critical piece. We have to ensure that everything we said we're going to do is a part of that new system, especially stuff that wasn't a part of our day-to-day activity. It was something that was introduced for compliance to the quote-unquote upgrade. We need to make sure that we're sustaining that we're continuing to execute to the plan. If we know what we're doing and we don't do it, it's not a good thing, right? If we have defined, if we planned, but we don't do it, it's not going to be a good thing. The organization that chose to build the bridge system, meaning we kept our old quality manual, we added a couple paragraphs here and there, we've created a lot of redundancy in our system, or we added additional documentation to address some of those gaps, but really didn't clean anything up. Now we have a significant potential for duplication, and with duplication comes the possibility for us to modify it in one location and create conflict in another situation or another location. So cleaning up the documents to reflect what we actually do and ensuring that we comply with the standard, with our customer requirements, that's pretty important. The other thing that has changed really is the expectation on top management, and specifically their involvement. We've got information being provided to them, and I don't like the way I worded this, so I apologize for that. But the expectations on top management and the information provided to them to assist them in making those informed choices. The IAF and ISO published a wonderful paper a number of years back called Output Matters. And it talks to the importance of having, even though we have the shingle hanging on the wall, we have the certificate hanging on the wall, it doesn't guarantee a good product. It means we have the systems in place, we have the tools in place to be able to make informed decisions, and it's going to rely on the top management group to make those informed decisions. So now in the management review, we're seeing additional requirements, additional items that are called out, that are added to the list of things that need to be considered. So we're presenting more information to that top management group. But it still relies on top management to make good decisions or effective decisions. And when we don't make good decisions, we react, we change, we modify, we adapt and overcome to get us back on the path that we need to be by continually monitoring that data. So I think we could argue and possibly agree that that really has been the expectation all along. It just became more directly or more explicitly stated in the standard that top management's got to be involved. This is not the quality manager system. This is not something that's done in isolation. Top management has to be intimately involved in the creation of and the sustainment of the system. Otherwise, it won't work. In addition, all those process owners have to be involved. They have to define corrective actions to fix it, because if you as a quality professional are defining how they're going to fix the process, is it really going to sustain? And I think we can all agree it's not. So, commentary-wise, defining organizational context is key. We've beat this horse in past webinars, but I'm going to hit it again because it's so darn important. Section 4 of the standard is this organizational context, or context of the organization. If we don't have a thorough understanding of our organizational context, we're not going to be successful. In the past, in previous standards, this really was something that was informally defined. Now it has to be more formalized, okay? So Section 4 is going to tell us we have to understand what do we do and what do we don't do. What's the scope and what exclusions or not applicabilities exist within the system. We have to define who cares, aka the interested parties, right? Who cares about us, and then what do they care about? What are their issues, needs, expectations? Why do we exist? And what do we need to provide to those interested parties to make sure that we continue to exist? We also have to define how we plan to achieve those needs, how we plan to execute and provide for the needs of our interested parties. And that's done through processes. Maybe we identify risks to those and we mitigate those risks. Maybe we identify opportunities to help us satisfy needs that our interested parties didn't know they had, or sell new services, higher margin services, whatever it might be, right? All of these sections are found within, all of these items are found within Clause 4. Risks and opportunities are briefly mentioned there, but they're also captured in Section 6.1 specifically, but they have a direct tie back to this organizational context. The last thing that I wanted to highlight, again, there's more to the standard. This is just a high-level version here. How do we know if we did a good job? What are our process monitoring and measuring results? What are the organizational KPIs or quality objectives, as the standard calls it? What are we measuring to know whether or not we've done a good job? As we know, our processes need to be monitored and measured where applicable, measured where appropriate, so that we can ensure it's working or not working. And if it's not working, management's going to use that data to help drive organizational change and fix it, right? All of those measurements are going to tie back up to our quality objectives or our top-level objectives on delivery, on safety, on profitability, on growth, or whatever they might be. And then we've got those metrics that are tied to a lower level so that operators can see move. They can see the needle move as they're executing on a day-to-day basis. And that is in turn going to roll into those top-level organizational quality objectives. Now, if I've lost you with that analogy or with that description, again, we've got a great webinar on quality objectives and metrics and KPIs, and feel free to find that on the newsroom, the NSF newsroom, or if you need help finding it, send me an email. I'll give you my email address here at the end. The other thing organizational context does is it's going to provide a framework for our business. It provides a roadmap as well through our process definition and the interaction and sequence of those processes, but it's really going to define who we are, what we do, why we do it, right? From there, we're going to go into all of the lower level procedures, lower level documentation, lower level training to help sustain that at a more task-oriented level. Looks like Ryan just posted the webinar link in the comments, so you've got a link to it there. That's awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, regarding our organizational context, it really starts with our customer. And I think we could argue that it starts with us and that our customers are included. I don't want to get into that debate, but we do need to consider customer statutory regulatory requirements as a part of defining who we are, right? So in order for us to truly understand what our quote-unquote interested parties need or want, we need to read the contract. We need to read the fine print and understand what they are looking for. Now, we've all heard the toilet seat that costs $200 or whatever it might be. If you read the fine print, there's a reason that those cheaper items cost a lot of money because of some of the tasks that are associated with supporting that contract. If we don't have a true understanding of those needs and expectations from the administrative task level, we're not going to define our organizational context to the appropriate level, and we're not going to provide the infrastructure, the resources, the work environment that's necessary associated. So we need to truly do a good job of digging in on the customer contract, reviewing those requirements, and understanding the customer's needs and expectations. We got to have that internal process to capture those needs and then communicate them through our internal groups, production planning, through engineering, whomever it might be, and then even to our external providers, because some of those regulatory requirements have to be flowed down to our external providers, and we've got to have a way to do that. Some of the customer requirements need to be flowed down to those external providers as well. But we've got to do a good job of contract review and understanding the customer's needs. And then if there's something new that comes from a new customer, our organizational context is dynamic, and we need to update. We need to modify that to account for who we are now, not just who we were when we built the system in 2017. One of the interesting things, and I'm sure you've seen it, I know the the AAQG level has seen this somewhat. The new clauses weren't problematic. Some of those new clauses that were introduced, we don't see a ton of nonconformance associated with that. And I think part of that is because of the focus on some of these new requirements. There was a lot of emphasis on what is product safety and what is counterfeit and how do we implement systems to address those, right? I'm hopeful that that's the reason we're not seeing a ton of nonconformance associated with it. But I also believe that part of this is we just don't have a thorough understanding as a manufacturing organization how product safety fits, how counterfeit fits into us, how the other new requirements are being incorporated into that. And as we continue to experience different aspects of the standard or new interpretations of it, I think our expectations or our needs will change. And I'm saying that from the certified organization's perspective. And that's going to come from our customer, from industry, from the news, whatever it might be. I've listed a couple names here under the counterfeit piece. Kobe Steel was a fairly recent example of counterfeit that was introduced on the non-electronic side. We've heard about counterfeit electronics for a long, long time, but we've now seen it in metals. We see it all the time for designer goods and for some of those more expensive textiles, right? It's something that's very prevalent, something that happens every day. Now it's being introduced in the standard that we need to be sure of our source of materials. We need to be sure that we've got a system in place to prevent those controls, prevent them from entering our value stream. And we're not reliant totally on detection. We've got processes in case we use some of those high-risk suppliers or high-risk external providers. But we truly need to put the focus on prevention, on engineering controls, on monitoring the risks associated with it through maybe obsolescence screening, material availability, whatever it might be. Industry-wide, we've seen a push out on lead times. I mean, I'm sure everybody's nodding their head or will nod their head when I say lead times have increased significantly over the last year. And I couldn't tell you all of the reasons for it, but I've personally seen within the last couple of weeks a number of major aluminum distributors. They've basically shut off the mill, or been shut off by the mill rather, that there's no more mill runs available for them to purchase for the rest of the year. So we're seeing push-outs for deliveries for all of the machine parts associated with it, and that's going to trickle down to everybody. That's not just metals; it's being felt across the industry. But something to keep in mind: anytime those lead times push out, the risk of counterfeit goes up because now material availability has diminished, and we're probably going to see more possibilities or more likelihood of less than legitimate sourcing of parts or less than legitimate parts entering the value stream. So something to keep in mind. Under the product safety piece, kind of skipped over that one. Product safety, not occupational health and safety. That seems to be a misconception. Not the SMS from the aviation side. It's not employee well-being or making sure that we're doing things well for the employee. That really fits under the human factor side more so. Product safety is directly tied to our ability as an organization to ensure that we're not going to hurt or harm the product for its intended service environment. I'll read the definition right out of AS9100. It says the state in which a product is able to perform to its designed or intended purpose without causing unacceptable risk of harm to persons or damage to property. Without causing unacceptable risk of harm to persons or damage to property. So making sure that the product works in its intended environment without hurting other people or property. It's not your worker safety. That's important, but that's not the reason this was introduced. This was introduced to make sure that we understand what the product does, where it's going, and that nothing we do from a planning, from an execution, from a handling program are causing deleterious or harmful impacts upon the product. Because we may drop it. We may cause some minute fractures associated with that drop that aren't visible to the naked eye. If it doesn't get subjected to another NDT or some screening post-drop incident, now there's a risk of a fracture to exist inside of that product. And if it's going into a rotatable part on an engine, that's a big deal. Now, there's going to be some screening associated with those parts based on the risk, right? But we don't know what we don't know. And if we don't know where it's going, we don't know what it's used for, we don't know how we need to treat it, how we need to handle it, how we need to protect it to ensure that we're not causing undue harm. That's the intent behind the product safety clause. Now, if my employees are not aware of where the product is going, it's just another widget, and I'm sure you've heard people say that. I don't know what it does. It's just another widget. Are they going to be as diligent as they are if they hear, oh, this is the landing gear assembly for a Boeing 737 or for an Airbus A320? Those are aircraft that are flying over our homes every day. And if they fail, that's a big deal, right? No, you may not fly on an airplane, but chances are you've got airplanes flying near you, and no one wants that to land inside of your home. So we need to make sure that we're understanding what the product does and how we can help to contribute to its product safety or its survivability. Again, defined for the needs of the customer or the interested party and the type of the widgets. Sorry, I skipped over this line here. Any organization with widgets being handled, whether we are owning the design or not, or if we're just a service provider doing some chemical processing, some inspection type services, you have an impact on product safety. Justifying that as a non-applicable is going to be pretty darn difficult because you could cause harmful impact to the product. Therefore, you need to understand what your customer or interested party needs and the types of widgets you're handling so that you can do the right things through your process, through your realization activities to ensure that you're not hurting anything further. Okay? Next slide talks to awareness. 7.3 was introduced to ensure that we talk to our teams, and it says anyone under the organization's control, right? So anybody that's within our organization, we need to ensure that we're communicating and that they have an awareness of a bunch of stuff. For the AS side, there's the A through H. For the ISO side, it's A through D. We need to make sure that we're communicating the stuff that we've spent so much time in defining, like the quality policy, like the relevant quality objectives, the implications of not complying with the requirements of the system, how they contribute to product safety, why it's important to have ethical behavior. Back to my example earlier where I drop and create those microfractures, If I drop it and don't see anything and I put it back on the shelf as being good, is that ethical? Obviously not, depending on the type of product and its use. If we know that it's a fracture critical part, we drop it and we put it back on the shelf because I don't want to be responsible for doing that, obviously not ethical. If I know that this is going into a rotatable and I drop it and I put it back on the shelf without telling somebody, then I feel more onus, hopefully I feel more onus to report it, to not put it back on the shelf without telling somebody, because I understand the end use environment and why it's so important, right? That's really what this awareness piece is designed for, is implemented for, is to make sure that we're communicating to our employees and they're comprehending all of the stuff that we've spent so much time to develop as a part of our system, all of this information that we've spent so much time to gather, okay, or to define as a part of the management team. Point here, frequent, simplistic, and relatable messages as paramount. We got to tailor the information to the competence or needs of the personnel. Doing a one and done training on an annual basis, is that sufficient? And I'm going to say it depends. It depends on your employees, the competence of those employees, and the types of products that you're doing. Some companies do it way more frequent. Some have chosen to do a one-time awareness training, and there seems to be a correlation between the lack of understanding of those requirements and the less frequent trainings or less frequent exposures to these requirements. We got to make it relate to them as well, right? Everybody has heard with them before, what's in it for me? We got to tell the story so that they understand, so that they can relate to it, so that they can comprehend it and hopefully internalize it. One of the quotes that I've used on numerous occasions, got listed over here, is to important people, we insist on explaining why. To unimportant people, we simply tell how, and they can tell how we feel by the way we talk to them. You think about that, any change that's come down in your life, been forced upon you by somebody else, unless you're just that overly optimistic or overly happy person, chances are you said, well, that's dumb, I don't want to do that. If we were told why we had to make this change, and it was for a logical reason, chances are we said, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to do that from now on, right? So being able to understand the why and communicate that in a way that relates to them, tailored to the competence of the personnel, it's going to be a way more effective programming. And if we have people working within the factory that understand the context now, we're going to be way more successful. Next comment here is from design applicability. Design may be applicable when service offerings are catered to an individual company. Under the old standard, widget design really was what the 7.3 clause was created for. Under the new standard 8.3, we're talking service and product. So we may have these service offerings that are unique or tailored to the needs of our customer. Now we need to really be thinking about whether or not we design services versus designing widgets. Also for clarification here, if I am designing tooling that's part of a NRE, non-recurring expense, and that's deliverable to my customer, I'm a designer. I'm a widget maker and a tooling designer as a scope of my company. So we need to be very careful about understanding our context again so that we can truly define our processes with that in mind. Okay? Risks and opportunities. We've talked a lot about risks and opportunities through previous webinars, and I'll say overall this is going to depend again on the context of your organization. But these are great programs for us to implement because we can capture the needs of our interested parties, aka the employees, capture the needs of our interested parties at the customer level, at the supplier level, and we can understand what could go wrong in trying to execute to those, and then we mitigate it, right? We count those as risks, we create mitigation plans for those that matter, or we can maybe see some opportunities for us to get better, faster, cheaper, stronger, and track those. So the definitions are listed here, the effect of uncertainty, positive or negative. Opportunities are situations favorable to achieve an intended result. We create system, create an infrastructure capable of addressing those, solicited from multiple levels, and then we manage the results. We manage the outputs, and those are reviewed through management review. That's a required input. But we manage those to ensure that we're allocating appropriate infrastructure, resources, changing of the work environment to account for that. And we're going to see results as a output of that, as an output of addressing the risks and opportunities, or having an understanding of what our risks and opportunities are. Another poll question here. Through a year of internal audits, how many internal findings are generally caught with action taken? So in other words, you guys have an annual calendar, an annual schedule for your internal audit program. If you execute that entire year's review, how many findings do you generate through your internal audits? How many findings do we generate through our internal audits? I'll give everybody just another minute to go through this. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. So we can see a lot of people are generating somewhere between 15 and 1, with the majority in that 4 to 7 range, right? Now, if we look at the standard, how many shall statements exist within that standard? And we're way over 100, right? So we have an opportunity to perform or not perform against any one of those shall statements, and we're saying on average over the course of 1 year, there's only 4 to 7 things that we do wrong, okay? Internal audits are the tool for us to be honest with ourselves, for us to take advantage of knowing where the skeletons are buried and fix them. As a third party, we're not going to fault you if you're finding it and resolving it. As a customer, they're not going to fault you for it either. If your internal audit produces 100 findings and you adequately address every one of those, man, I'm going to give you a high five versus any concerns with how that's being done. If we ignore those issues, they're going to hurt you. It breeds complacency within your organization, and we tend to have problems manifest in terms of escapes, product impact, third-party findings, customer findings, etc. We need to involve and engage competent stakeholders performing objective audits. We don't audit our own work. We need to make sure that our auditors are competent to the requirements that you guys have defined for auditors. But I'm a huge fan of involving my internal customers in performing audits of my process. They're the recipient of my outputs, and they're going to help me to understand what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, and how I can better impact them. So if I have, a cross-functional group of auditors and I'm taking advantage of somebody from shipping auditing production, now hopefully they can help to articulate the needs of the shipping team, of that internal customer. Through the internal audit, we identify what's broken, we fix it from a systemic level, versus simply having somebody come through and fill out a checklist for the sake of compliance. We need to ensure that our auditing tools are updated for the current standards. And the reason I put this portion in here in particular is I've seen a number of audits where we used predecessor standard, the OER from AS9100C as an example. And we didn't address the gaps. We didn't address the new standard requirements. We need to make sure that we've got a tool that's capable of catching all of those new requirements and addressing them. We need to demonstrate that all those clauses have been identified, assessed, and evidence of conformance captured. Okay. In addition, considering our customers' criteria, whether it be a GE document, a Boeing document, or customer X document, we need to make sure that we're doing audits against those requirements in addition. Again, we know where the skeletons are buried. If we're not finding stuff, there's some great resources that exist for sharpening our pencil on the internal audit program. The evaluation guidance material from the IAQG, again, I'll show you where that's at here in a few minutes. Great tool to help you understand what the standard means, what else we should be looking for. Implementation of layered process audits. If you haven't seen or heard about them, I'd definitely recommend. This is where we get different levels of the organization involved in doing a smaller audit, a smaller bite of the audit. But when we get different perspectives from managers, supervisors, maybe those leads, we're going to see it from a different perspective. We're going to identify different things as we're looking at those areas or those clauses, and hopefully get more findings, more effective audits as a result. All those issues are then going to be reported to the management team through corrective actions, through audit results reported in the management review. We're going to fix those. We're going to get better as a result. As a management team, we should be questioning a lack of findings. If our audit process isn't yielding anything wrong, yet our data shows that we're not delivering on time, or we've got escapes, we've got inefficiency, we should be questioning why we're not catching it through the internal audit process and what we can do to change the internal audit process to make it more effective. A process that has no findings or few findings is of no value. Nobody's perfect. No organization is perfect. When we find stuff, we need to fix it. We need to address the problems through correction, that short-term action, or we need to identify the root cause. We need to fix that root cause. There are several tools associated with fixing root cause. Again, we've got great webinars for both the internal audit side and the corrective action side that go into the detail of what the 5 why is, what a fishbone is, how we can identify root cause, what the corrective actions or why the corrective actions need to address the root cause, and then we need to evaluate, make sure that it was implemented. In addition, we need to make sure that the actions implemented were effective, and they are different and distinct tasks. We verify short-term to ensure that the tasks are completed, and then there's a long-term effectiveness verification to ensure that it doesn't happen again, right? Something to consider is adding these to our internal auditing processes so that we're looking at them on an ongoing basis to ensure that those corrective actions have sustained and that the problems haven't manifested in a different way. This last bullet's very, very important. Quality can't do all of this, right? And I'm saying quality in a figurative sense. We can't have one person be responsible for corrective action across the board in terms of defining, executing, et cetera. That person can be the champion. They can be the responsible party, if you will, but we really need to let the janitor pick his broom. We need to have the process owners, the area management involved in defining what they're going to change in the process so that those corrective actions can sustain on a long-term basis. If we're not doing that, we probably should be thinking about it. Next poll question here. How many management reviews do you hold on an annual basis? How many management reviews are done on an annual basis? Give everybody just a couple more seconds here to click their responses in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. Overwhelming majority is once a year. Now, we have a webinar that talks to the approach or really taking credit for those more frequent management reviews that you do. I would almost guarantee everybody here that's clicked on the once a year option, you're doing weekly meetings for schedule, for maintenance of the schedule, for performance to budget, for safety, all these committees that you're a part of, right? Rather than rehashing that same type of information on an annual basis when it's now 5 months since we had an escape and we've already addressed it, does it make sense to take credit for some of those more frequent meetings? Again, we've got a webinar that talks to this, and it correlates with a sports team using their annual owners meeting for a certain subset of objectives. We have our weekly coaches meetings. We have our pregame meetings. We have our in-between the play huddles. We have our timeouts that are options. All of those truly are the reviews of our system's effectiveness. It's just a matter of allowing our system to take credit for them and then driving the actions from one to the next through a rail, through some methodology for capturing action items and ensuring that they get resolved, okay? Top management's got to be involved. Management for the different areas have to be involved. We can't do it in isolation because it's not going to be effective. If we're not getting the needs of those all of the internal interested parties, we're not going to make effective change, okay? I've already hit this one, but I want to re-hit it again. Is annual enough? This is your determination or your decision as a company. But is it easy to action data that's 11 months old, or can we fix something that happened 11 months ago? Chances are you're doing all of these other meetings already, haven't been to a company where they're not talking about data on an ongoing basis, sometimes daily. Take credit for it. It doesn't take a whole lot of reporting to take credit for those. We just need to make sure that our system allows for it and that we're tracking the actions associated with those so that we can take credit for it, okay? But having this management review process is going to help us to ensure that when we find stuff, we fix it. When we see the data isn't going the way we want it to go, we send out our team of auditors, or we implement corrective action to drive that change, that behavioral change, or we allocate resources to drive that behavioral change. Overall, there's 4 systems, and anybody that I've audited for or with can tell you there's 4 things that I'm going to pick on every time I'm on site. Contract review is one, because we need to understand who cares and what they care about. Key in determining the context of the organization, right? I'm going to pick on management review, internal audits, and corrective action every time, because those are the tools that the system, the standard, have identified for us to find, fix, review, and address anything that pops up. And if those systems are broken, your company will struggle to sustain. If you've got an effective means of finding your problems, taking complete and total corrective action so that it doesn't happen again, and involving the management team so that we're understanding what resource changes are needed and allocating the appropriate resources, we can fix anything. We can tackle anything that comes up. So that's all I have. I'm going to give Mike and Marty just a couple minutes each to, or a couple seconds here, or whatever they want to take, to expand or articulate anything that they wanted to expand upon. And then we'll wrap it up with some of these resources, point to where those are at, and then take in a few questions. So, Marty, let's start with you, sir. Marty, you still there? All right, let's go to Mike.
Well, Don, I don't really have a lot to add. You touched on some points that I think are very valuable, and I want everyone that's on this webinar to remember them. But the lessons learned to this point are great. We've not stopped learning. Industry will continue to write either resolutions or FAQs in regard to some of these new parts of the scheme, and we need to stay on top of it. We can't stop learning ourselves. So keep aware, keep alert. We'll keep you posted, but trust me, this is only the first round of lessons learned.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And to expand upon what Mike just said, on an annual basis, all of the aerospace auditors attend, the America's aerospace auditors attend what's called the RMC Auditor Workshop. So it's an annual thing, July timeframe, where there are a number of presentations that are given by industry, by other CBs, on how we interpret certain things or how we try to help the modified requirements, right? How we interpret those requirements. We pledge to you to help communicate that from a calibration standpoint for clients and auditors, but to ensure that that information is being disseminated in a more proactive manner rather than auditor coming on site saying, I'm going to write you a nonconformity because this is the new expectation. So we're going to do our best to get there, but understand that there are a number of resources available to you from the IAQG's website, and I don't have a picture of the ISO working groups folder or picture, webpage either, but they've got a number of great resources. On the IAQG website, we have the Supply Chain Management Handbook, probably one of the best free resources you can ask for if you're looking for input on how to change something or what the quote-unquote norm is or the expectations are, this is a great resource. Again, totally free. You do have to register for an account, but it's totally free to you, okay? Consult it, look at it. It's not auditable requirement, but it is a great resource if you're looking to understand what we should be doing. A lot of the resources we've mentioned are available from the standards questions or from the deployment support materials or from the ISO support materials page. All three of these take you to the same spot, okay? If you're not a 9100 company, you'll want to click on these two because it brings up a matrix. If you're 9100, you can click on that one directly, and it'll bring up that evaluator's guidance material document that I spoke about, the clarifications document that I spoke about. Just a number of excellent resources, and to Mike's point, resources that are being continually modified, continually upgraded as our lessons are being learned as these clarifications come in. The other thing I'll point you to is the OASIS database. For those that are in the aerospace group side, you know you have an OASIS account. Within that OASIS account is a feedback system where you can phone a friend to the assigned document parties, the assigned representatives for those documents within our sector or at the international level, and ask for clarification. Hey, we've got this situation. This is what the standard says. Help. And they're probably going to point you to something on this page, whether it be the FAQ or those clarification documents. But if it's something that hasn't been addressed yet, they will respond through that OASIS database feedback system. Phenomenal resource. Again, NSF is always an option to you. We've got a number of webinars that you can get to from our webpage, or you can contact us directly. Here's our email addresses. I'm going to leave this slide up as we're trying to address some of the questions. So if you have questions, type them into the chat, type them into the question section, and Ryan will help us go through those.
Yep, so a few questions so far. For a company without design control, if the parts are delivered to all customer requirements, what is our responsibility to product safety?
Miss Jane, I missed you this year. I'm sorry I didn't get to come visit you. That's a great question. We're not responsible for design. What are we responsible for in terms of product safety? I'll give you a cool example that somebody relayed to me here. It was a company that was doing some skin, some composite work associated with a stealth program, and the skin is pretty critical in making sure that the stealth nature of the product worked, right? There's a seam when those sheets come together, and that seam is closed up by an epoxy, by a glue, by a two-part chemical. That chemical was very susceptible to moisture ingress. It was hygroscopic, allowed moisture to come in. And the company that was mixing that epoxy was using a wooden spatula. And we know wood is very susceptible to moisture ingress as well. It's hygroscopic material. So by mixing that with a wooden spatula, I am pushing moisture into that glue. I'm causing harm. I'm causing a deleterious impact to the product based on the way I'm handling it as a non-design responsible party. If I'm machining a widget and I put some chemical into the metal or against the metal that may cause adhesion issues down the line. Silicone as an example, because silicone causes some problems for adhesion of process chemistries further down the process, further down the realization chain, I can cause some harm. Now what's going to define whether or not it's silicone-free? Contract, design, prints, whatever it might be. This is where you need to understand, truly understand what you're building, what impact you can have upon it, and how you can minimize those risks to the product, to the business, to the customer. Hopefully that answered your question. Mike, anything you want to add, feel free to chime in as well.
No, just along a similar line, and I get this question a lot. We don't design, we merely manufacture, or in some cases, we're a supplier, somebody sends us a print, they even send us the material, and all we do is turn and finish it to a particular size. Well, I worked with companies that did exactly that, and they would make an inner and outer race that went into a clutch type assembly. It was a rotational unit. So by finish grinding the components, you could induce heat, you could induce stress cracks, not necessarily noticeable to the naked eye, but there. So it goes into the rotational unit, it comes apart. The larger assembly that goes into, which is what the big contract is about, ends up failing. It could fail catastrophically, or it could fail minimally, but it's a failure. That failure can create safety issues all over. I ground that inner race to a particular spec, but I induced heat stress to it, not knowingly, but I was still responsible for that. So just because you don't design the product, and maybe if you don't even know exactly what it goes in, you might want to find out, or at least take the path that says this is going in something critical whether I know it or not, because if it can come apart or it can break or something you did can impact something down the road, product safety falls on you also.
Absolutely. Next question.
Great. Yeah, one final question. Could you please repeat what were the 4 areas that you always audit?
Yeah, absolutely. This is Don's personal opinion. I'll let Mike expand on his list if there's others as well. But for companies that I go audit, companies that I go visit, there are 4 things that I'm going to touch every single time. It's going to be contract review. It's going to be internal audits, corrective action, and management review. Again, corrective action, internal audits, management review, truthfully, the standard requires that we're touching those every time anyways, right? Contract review, I'm going to audit to make sure that there's no changes to the context, to the requirements that your customers, your interested parties have set forth, and ensure that you've built your system around who cares and what they care about. Now, the AS standard tells me that I'm going to also audit purchasing, so I'm going to have to audit purchasing. And then if you're a widget maker, chances are I'm going to be auditing your manufacturing operations as well. We're allowed to skip that through surveillance activity, but again, Don's opinion, production is where you make the money. I'm going to touch that if you're doing production, but I will absolutely touch the contract review and those other 3 elements, internal audits, management review, and corrective actions every single time. Mike, anything to add there?
No, you hit the exact same hot buttons that I have. And just to clarify what Don said, he didn't say that those were the 4 areas he would audit everything. Those are hot buttons. He will audit other areas every time also, as he said, purchasing. But to me, contract review is paramount, regardless of whether you're making a widget or you're actually doing a full-up assembly. Contract review is where you start and where you get your walking directions from. And then the others, corrective action, internal audit, and management review, those are the tools that are going to keep your business either afloat or help it not float so well if you're not implementing them correctly. So, yeah, he hit every hot button that I have.
Perfect. Any other questions?
I think that's all the questions we've gotten in so far. Your contact information is on the screen. Oh, we got one more that just came in. How do we internally audit contract reviews? Our process is simple. An Excel document.
Sure, and feel free to reach out to us directly if you need some more specific direction on this. But from an internal audit perspective, we're looking to see what's come in, what we execute through our process, and what our outputs are for our customers, our internal customers, right? And our external customers, because there's going to be some order acknowledgement back to the external customer. In addition, we're going to have some internal customers that need, demand pricing, quality requirements, maybe those DPAS or DFARS flow down requirements, things like that. Through the internal audit process, we're looking at all of that sort of stuff to make sure that we've truly defined what our customers care about. Again, who cares and what they care about, and that information has been implemented throughout the rest of the system, because it really does touch all of the subsequent processes, including our administrative or our management processes. It really does touch everything, right? So that internal audit should be focusing on all of those aspects. What do we need? What do we do? What are the outputs? And then we're looking for those handoffs to make sure that they're being executed and implemented properly at our subsequent internal and external customers. In addition, metrics. We want to look at our metrics to ensure that we have a process that's not just implemented correctly, but we're doing the right things. We've talked in the past, and on that KPI webinar that we talked about, that I mentioned, we have metrics to tell us whether or not we're doing the right things, as opposed to our procedures that are telling us whether we're doing things correctly. So we create this recipe, and if we execute the recipe and every single piece of it that we produce is garbage because our customers don't want it, it's pretty important for us to keep that in mind as we're doing the internal audits as well. So we want to look at that, the metrics, the KPIs, whatever the process effectiveness measurements or monitoring data is, as a part of that internal audit. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, and Mike doesn't have anything to add, on behalf of NSF, thank you very much for allowing us to join you for your lunch period or whatever you're doing to watch this video, or if you're downloading the recorded session later on. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact any one of us. In the survey, when you exit the webinar, there's going to be some questions asked about how we did and things that we can improve upon, and then any future topics that you would like to see introduced into the webinars. At this point, we're planning another session regarding the use of the mark, how to properly advertise your AS9100 or ISO certification status, because we've seen a few issues with that recently. So we wanted to ensure that we're communicating that, the resources that are available to you as the client organization, and the expectations that go along with that. So more information will be coming on that. That's about all I have. I'll turn the time back over to Ryan and let him do the administrative stuff. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for joining, everyone. You should see this recording come in your inbox early next week. It'll also be posted on our website at the link I sent earlier. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.